The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Eleanor Hartley arrived at Ashfield Manor. She stepped down from the coach with a single worn trunk and a letter of reference clutched tightly in her gloved hand. The great house rose before her like a gray giant, its windows glowing faintly through the mist. She had traveled far to reach this place, and she had left behind more than anyone at Ashfield could ever guess. She was shown into the study by an elderly butler named Mr. Prescott, who studied her with quiet curiosity before knocking on the heavy oak door. "Miss Hartley, your grace," he announced. Nathaniel Ashworth, the Duke of Wrexham, looked up from his desk. He was a tall man with dark hair and tired eyes, the kind of tired that came not from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying responsibility alone. He had buried his sister and her husband 2 years earlier, and since then, their 2 children had been his to raise. He rose to greet the new governess, expecting another timid young woman eager to please him. Instead, he found a woman with steady gray eyes, who did not lower her gaze the way most servants did. She curtsied properly, but there was something in the way she held herself, straight-backed, composed, that made him pause. "Your reference speaks well of you," he said, glancing at the letter on his desk. "Lady Fairmont says you taught her daughters mathematics, French, and history for 4 years. "Yes, your grace." "That is unusual. Most governesses do not teach mathematics." "I find numbers honest," Eleanor said simply. "They do not pretend to be something they are not." The Duke studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "The children are difficult. My niece Sophie is 8 and grieves quietly. My nephew Henry is 10 and grieves loudly. 3 governesses have left in the past year. I hope you will last longer than a season." "I intend to, your grace." He did not know then how true those words would prove to be. The children were exactly as difficult as he had described, but Eleanor did not flinch from them. On her first morning in the schoolroom, Henry knocked over an inkwell on purpose, watching her with defiant eyes, waiting for her to scold him, or worse, to cry as the last governess had. Eleanor simply knelt down, picked up a cloth, and began cleaning the mess herself. "You may help me, or you may watch me do it alone," she said calmly. "Either way, the ink will be cleaned before lessons begin." Henry stared at her, surprised. Slowly, he knelt beside her and began wiping the desk. Sophie, who had been hiding behind a curtain, peeked out. She had not spoken a full sentence to any adult since her parents' deaths, communicating mostly through nods and whispers to her brother. Eleanor did not force her to speak. Instead, she simply left a small book of pressed flowers on Sophie's desk each morning, along with a blank page and a pencil, inviting her to draw if she wished, without any pressure to explain herself. By the end of the first week, Sophie had filled 3 pages with drawings of flowers, birds, and once, a small sketch of Eleanor herself, sitting by the window with sunlight on her hair. The Duke noticed the change from a distance. He often passed the schoolroom on his way to his study, and where before he had heard only silence or crying, now he heard the soft rhythm of a voice reading aloud, occasionally interrupted by Henry's questions or, once, astonishingly, by the sound of Sophie laughing. He began to find reasons to walk past the schoolroom more often than his duties required. One afternoon, he found Eleanor bent over the estate ledgers in the library, where she had been asked to help organize old records for a visiting solicitor. She moved through the columns of numbers with quick, practiced ease, catching an error in a tenant's rent calculation that had gone unnoticed for 2 years. "You have a talent for accounts," Nathaniel said from the doorway, startling her. She straightened quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "Forgive me, your grace. I did not mean to overstep." "You have not overstepped. You have saved my solicitor a great deal of embarrassment." And he stepped closer, studying the neat rows of figures she had corrected. Where did a governess learn to read a ledger so well? For a moment, something flickered across her face. Caution, perhaps, or fear. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual calm composure. "My father believed a woman should understand her own affairs, your grace. He did not think ignorance made a lady more genteel. A wise man." "He was," she said quietly, and something in her voice told Nathaniel not to ask further. He did not press her that day, but he began to notice other things. The way she spoke French without hesitation, correcting Henry's pronunciation with the ease of someone raised speaking it. The way she recognized a piece of music at the pianoforte before anyone announced its composer. The way she carried herself at dinner, on the rare occasions she joined the family table, with a grace that seemed inherited rather than learned. He said nothing, but he watched. The London season arrived, and with it, the usual parade of invitations, visits, and expectations. Nathaniel's aunt, Lady Beatrice, arrived at Ashfield unannounced, as she often did, with a list of eligible young ladies she considered suitable for a duke. You cannot avoid marriage forever, Nathaniel, she said over tea, tapping her list with a gloved finger. Lady Camilla Sutherland has asked after you 3 times this month alone. Her family is old, her fortune is considerable, and she is, by every account, quite lovely. I have met Lady Camilla, Nathaniel said, staring out the window toward the garden, where he could see Eleanor walking with the children, pointing out something in the hedges that made Henry laugh. And? She spoke to me for 20 minutes about a hat. Lady Beatrice sighed. Nathaniel, your mother's wish was for you to find a wife who would love those children. That is a rare thing to find in a ballroom, I grant you, but you must look. I am looking, he said, though his eyes remained on the garden. Lady Beatrice followed his gaze and saw Eleanor kneeling beside Sophie, helping her pin a wildflower into her hair. For a long moment, his aunt said nothing. Then, quietly, she said, Nathaniel, she is your governess. I am aware. Society will not forgive such a thing easily. Society, Nathaniel said, turning back to his tea, has not yet earned the right to tell me what to forgive. As the weeks passed, an understanding grew between Nathaniel and Eleanor, unspoken but undeniable. It lived in small moments, a shared smile over Henry's stubborn refusal to practice his penmanship, a quiet conversation in the library after the children had gone to bed, a walk through the orchard where they spoke of books and ideas rather than duties and expectations. Eleanor knew the danger of what was growing between them. A governess who allowed herself feelings for her employer risked everything, her position, her reputation, her future. She tried, more than once, to distance herself. She declined invitations to join him for evening walks. She kept her conversations brief and proper. But Nathaniel was not easily discouraged. You are avoiding me, he said one evening, finding her alone in the garden after the children had been put to bed. I am doing my duty, Your Grace. Your duty does not require you to flee every time I enter a room. Eleanor turned to face him, her composure cracking slightly. Your Grace, I am a governess. You are a duke. There are things that cannot happen between us, no matter what either of us might wish. Why not? Because society would destroy us both. Because you have a name to protect, and children who need stability, not scandal. Because, she stopped herself, pressing her lips together. Because what? She shook her head and said nothing more, turning back toward the house. Nathaniel watched her go, more certain than ever that there was a story behind her silence, a story she was not yet ready to tell him. Lady Beatrice, growing impatient with her nephew's continued avoidance of London's marriage market, insisted on hosting a grand ball at Ashfield itself, inviting the finest families in the region, including Lady Camilla Sutherland and her ambitious mother. Nathaniel could not refuse without causing talk, and so the ball was arranged for the height of summer. On the night of the ball, the great hall of Ashfield glowed with candlelight, musicians played in the corner, and the finest ladies of the county arrived in silks and jewels, each hoping to catch the Duke's attention. Lady Camilla wore a gown of deep blue, her hair arranged in elaborate curls, and she positioned herself near the entrance where Nathaniel would be certain to see her first. But Nathaniel's eyes searched the room for someone else. He found Eleanor near the edge of the hall, dressed simply in gray, standing apart from the celebration as governesses were expected to do. She had brought Sophie down briefly to watch the dancing before bed, and the little girl clung to her hand, eyes wide with wonder at the glittering scene. Nathaniel crossed the room, ignoring the whispers that followed him, and stopped before Eleanor. Miss Hartley, he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, would you do me the honor of the first dance? The hall fell silent. Lady Camilla's smile froze on her face. Lady Beatrice's teacup paused halfway to her lips. Even the musicians hesitated before continuing their song. Eleanor's cheeks flushed deep red. Your Grace, I could not possibly. You could, Nathaniel said gently, extending his hand. And I am asking you to. For a long moment, Eleanor stood frozen, torn between propriety and the quiet longing she had tried so hard to hide. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his, and they moved together onto the dance floor, as the entire assembly watched in stunned silence. Whispers spread through the hall like fire through dry grass. A duke, dancing with his own governess, in front of the finest families in the county. Lady Camilla's mother fanned herself furiously, muttering to anyone who would listen about the scandal of it all. It was at that moment that an older gentleman near the refreshment table, a magistrate named Sir Edmund Cole who had traveled from London for the occasion, set down his glass and stared at Eleanor with sudden, dawning recognition. Vance, he murmured to himself. Lady Eleanor Vance. The name spread through the hall within minutes, carried on whispers from one guest to another. Sir Edmund, unable to contain his surprise, approached Lady Beatrice directly. "Forgive me," he said, "but I believe your nephew is dancing with Lady Eleanor Vance, daughter of the late Earl of Renwick." Lady Beatrice's fan stopped moving. The Earl of Renwick lost his title years ago. Convicted of treason, was he not? Wrongly convicted, many believed, though nothing was ever proven in his favor before his death. His family lost everything: title, fortune, and standing. I had heard his daughter disappeared into service somewhere in the countryside, taking a false name to escape the shame of it. By the time the dance ended, the truth had traveled to every corner of the hall. Lady Camilla, humiliated and furious, stepped forward as Nathaniel and Eleanor returned from the dance floor. "Is it true?" she demanded, loud enough for the room to hear. "Is this woman truly the daughter of a traitor, working in your household under a false name? Your Grace, how could you allow such deception into your home, around your own children?" The hall waited, breathless, for Nathaniel's response. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly in his, but she did not pull away. "It is true," she said, before Nathaniel could speak. "My name is Eleanor Vance. My father was accused of treason and stripped of everything he had built. I took a different name because I had no other way to survive, no other way to earn an honest living once our fortune and reputation were gone. I did not lie to harm anyone. I lied because society left me no other choice." A murmur swept through the crowd. Some guests looked at her with pity, others with suspicion, and a few, surprisingly, with quiet admiration for her honesty. Nathaniel stepped forward, still holding her hand, and faced the room. "I have known for some time that Miss Hartley, Lady Vance, was not entirely who she claimed to be. I did not ask, because I did not need a name to know her character. I have watched her heal 2 grieving children with patience and kindness that no title could teach. I have watched her correct my accounts, educate my niece and nephew, and carry herself with more dignity in a governess's dress than most ladies manage in silk and jewels." He paused, looking directly at Lady Camilla, then at the room beyond her. "What is more," he continued, "I have spent the past 2 months quietly reviewing the case against the Earl of Renwick, with the help of my solicitor and Sir Edmund himself, whom I consulted privately weeks ago. We have found strong evidence that the accusations against Lord Renwick were false, built upon forged letters and the testimony of a rival who benefited greatly from his downfall." Gasps filled the hall. Sir Edmund stepped forward, confirming what Nathaniel had said, explaining that new evidence had come to light suggesting the entire case had been a fabrication designed to seize the Earl's lands. Eleanor stood frozen, tears filling her eyes as she looked up at Nathaniel. "You knew. All this time, you knew, and you said nothing?" "I wanted to be certain before I gave you false hope," he said softly. "I did not want to promise you your father's name back, only to fail you." In the weeks that followed, the evidence Nathaniel had gathered was presented formally, and the Earl of Renwick's name was cleared. The title, though it could not be restored to a man no longer living, was passed rightfully to Eleanor as his only remaining heir, along with the return of a modest portion of the family's original lands and fortune. Society, ever quick to judge and equally quick to change its judgment, began to speak of Lady Eleanor Vance not as a scandal, but as a woman of remarkable resilience and quiet dignity. Lady Camilla's outrage faded into the background, forgotten as newer gossip took its place. Lady Beatrice, who had once warned her nephew against such a match, was among the first to embrace Eleanor warmly, admitting that she had never seen the children so happy, nor her nephew so at peace. By autumn, Ashfield Manor prepared for a wedding rather than another ball. Sophie, who had once refused to speak, proudly announced to anyone who would listen that she would be carrying flowers for her new mother. Henry, no longer the defiant boy who had spilled ink to test his governess, practiced his best manners for the occasion, determined to walk Eleanor down the aisle himself, alongside his uncle's request. On the day of the wedding, sunlight filled the same hall where whispers had once spread like fire. Eleanor wore a simple gown, elegant without excess, and as she walked toward Nathaniel, the guests who had once doubted her now watched with genuine warmth. "You once told me," Nathaniel said quietly as they stood before the small gathering, "that numbers are honest because they do not pretend to be something they are not." "I remember," Eleanor said, smiling through happy tears. "I think you are the most honest person I have ever known," he said, "even when the world forced you to hide." As they exchanged their vows, Sophie held tightly to Henry's hand, both children beaming as their new mother became, at last, the Duchess of Wraxham, not because of the name she had reclaimed, but because of the quiet strength she had carried through every hardship, a strength that society, for all its whispers and judgments, had finally learned to respect. And so, The quiet governess who had entered Ashfield Manor with nothing but a worn trunk and a hidden past became its duchess, proving that true worth was never found in a title, but in the character carried beneath it.